I think the only game they'll lose is maybe Oklahoma or in the SEC championship.
They don't lose to Georgia? You think they beat Georgia?
I think Texas beats Georgia. I think Texas is a better team than Georgia.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Totally Biased Podcast, the audio show that ditches the filters and embraces our biases. Get ready for our Totally Biased takes on the biggest games, the fiercest rivalries, and everything in between. I'm here with my good buddy. How are you doing today, man?
Doing good and ready to talk about this chaotic week of college football.
It was a mess. It was really a mess. But at the same time, not a lot of really crazy upsets happened.
Almost.
There's one specific upset we got to get to. It felt like a lot of almost maybes, right? Like I really thought Tulane was going to pull it out. Tulane played Kansas State this week, for those that are unfamiliar, and they were leading most of that game. We're not able to pull it out in the end. Arkansas looked like they were going to beat Oklahoma State. They look like a really solid team in the SEC. I do want to bring that up as well. Bowling Green was beating Penn State at one point, and then it just all went away, and it made me very sad, except there was one very notable instance where it did not. I'm going to hand it off to you. Tell them about your biased game of the week, our biased game of the week.
Northern Illinois at Notre Dame. This is a game that Notre Dame was favored by, I believe it was 28.5. It was in South Bend, and somehow they sucked. The number 5 team in the country. I cannot look at a game that ended worse than this in the history of college football, other than maybe App State at Michigan. But that App State team went undefeated and won the FCS and then got an FBS bid the next year. So this Northern Illinois team, I mean, maybe they're that good. Maybe the MAC is just crazy this year.
Northern Illinois is a good football team. I do want to say that. They played very well in this game, but I don't think them winning this game is necessarily as much of a statement for them as it is a statement against Notre Dame. Notre Dame's offense, I really thought that their defense was going to be elite. It wasn't even that it was bad. They just gave up a ton of rushing yards. And shout out to Brown, who I can't remember his first name, but he had 99 yards in this game. Ran the ball really hard and was outstanding out of the backfield receiving. I think he was our leading receiver in this game. I know he had a receiving touchdown. He didn't have any touchdowns on the ground. This was more about Notre Dame's struggles to have an offense at all. I was very unimpressed with their play calling. Riley Leonard, what has happened to him in these first two games? Like, I thought he looked kind of frazzled against what is a pretty good Texas A&M defense. He looked bad in this game. He had 2 interceptions. That's the first time. I mean, he didn't have any interceptions. To put it simply, I think that if he continues to have these issues and if the play calling can't get him comfortable, and I think the way to get Riley Leonard comfortable is going to be getting him involved in the run game, I don't know if this Notre Dame offense is going to be able to keep up. They'll lose to USC. That's for sure, even with that great defense.
Yeah, I think that's a guarantee. And looking back on the Northern Illinois side of the ball, the guy we're talking about is Antario Brown. He had 20 carries for 99 yards, and he also had 2 receptions for 126 yards. That long reception was 83 yards for a touchdown. Impressive performance by one guy, but the final score was 16-14.
And it came down to a blocked field goal, too. I think that's one thing, if you're listening to coverage on this game, it might get missed, is that Notre Dame had a chance to go up in this game and got a field goal blocked. And that, I mean, you want to talk about devastating? I can't really even put it into words. That field goal was blocked with 2 minutes left to go in the game. And when that instance happens to you, I'm sorry, as a team, you got to find a way to recover. That's it. You got to fix it.
And just a funny stat here, looking at Notre Dame's punting, just to show how badly they couldn't finish drives. Their punter had 184 yards punting on 5 punts. That is sad.
And they were 0 for 2 on field goal attempts.
That's also sad. Get a new kicker.
Well, he had one of them blocked. But he may have had both of them blocked. I don't remember. I do remember the block at the end of the game for sure.
Oh, yeah. Everybody.
But they were getting pressure. Northern Illinois, Notre Dame, one of the biggest upsets. I will give credit to Northern Illinois. I think they do deserve to be ranked. I think they played pretty well. We'll see how they do in the MAC. MAC gets pretty crazy. All right, so the next game that we're going to hop into is obviously the big ticket, big noon kickoff game for some godforsaken reason. We can't play the best games at night because that's a sin. Yeah, Michigan's offense, they're going to stink without some big changes, man. That's my takeaway. The two quarterback system, and I said to watch for this last week, that two quarterback system does not work. It does not work. They got to either pick, I would pick Orgy. I think he gives you more options. Two quarterbacks is no quarterbacks. It's plain and simple. And Michigan's offense was so incredibly unimpressive this game.
They did stick pretty hard with Warren in this game, but I didn't think Warren was that great. He had some moments, but the biggest takeaway from this game is Texas. If we look at Texas, Ewers had a pretty stellar performance, but that Texas defense was in midseason form. We're going to talk about another defense that was also pretty good, but Texas definitely looks like a championship contender.
That next defense is not pretty good. I think that next defense has a chance to be elite this year. And I think Texas defense has a chance to be elite too. They played really, really outstanding. Ewers had a great game. Was efficient, which I think is a big thing for him. When Ewers is efficient, that Texas team is going to be really tough to beat. And seemingly the depleted running back room is not seeming like it's going to be that big of an issue right now. They've found some creative ways to get some other guys the ball, including Ryan Wingo had a 55-yard carry in this game. I think that it's really important for Texas. There's a lot of takeaways from this game, right? That, Texas is back. Texas is back. I think Texas is back this year. I would be curious to kind of see what happens going into next year. With Arch Manning, obviously, we expect him to be pretty good. Maybe they lose some pieces. I think the long term for Texas is definitely on the up and up. And back, I mean, they definitely could be back. I've heard some people saying they're back. What do you think?
Texas is back. A lot of people for the last 10 years have talked about how Texas is back. Texas is back. And then they go 7-5. They start off ranked in the top 10, then they fall right out. This year does not look like that. They've got all the pieces. This year, if you look into the future, who knows? I don't know what their recruiting looks like, but
I mean, they're Texas. they're gonna recruit pretty well.
But they had 5 guys carry the ball this week for 143 yards, which is pretty good.
And that's probably what they need too. They need a lot of guys carrying the ball. I mean, they're so burnt out in that running back room. They got 2 guys gone for the year. I'm curious to see them in SEC play. That's what I will say. I think the big matchup is obviously going to be against Georgia.
When do they play Georgia?
About middle of the year. I think it's middle of October. That'll be a big game, but they do get them at home. That's probably going to be a 1v2 unless they fall to Oklahoma, which I think is more likely than we might want to give it credit for, because Red River rivalry has a tendency to just cause some issues for everybody.
Texas struggles with Oklahoma every year. Even though Oklahoma does not look very good, and we can talk about that game a little bit, Texas always struggles with Oklahoma. You never know what you're going to get.
Never know what you're going to get there. Outside of that, their SEC schedule is pretty easy. They play Georgia. That's the big one. But then they really don't play anybody else. The next best team is probably Arkansas or Texas A&M, one of those two. And those are both road games, so that is kind of worth noting. But I'd be curious to kind of see what Texas looks like. I think that they may get worn down a little bit in SEC play because they're not used to having to play that consistent schedule. And Quinn Ewers' inconsistency at times does worry me. But if he's going to continue to play like this, where he's efficient, he's accurate, I'll be honest, I think Texas might be the best team in football.
You can make an argument for them being number 1 very easily. I think they have made a better beginning of season statement than Georgia has. However, Georgia hasn't really faced competition yet, and Texas has. The takeaways from this game is that Texas is very easily the number 1 team in the country and should be in contention for the championship. And Michigan, the defending national champion, has some work to do.
Where was Michigan's defensive line? Where was Mason Graham the entire game? I just kind of thought of this. The Texas O-line looked so good. They looked so good. I just get so frustrated. I get so frustrated because that's supposed to be your calling card. As a Big Ten team, you're supposed to be able to stop the run. And, I mean, they did a pretty okay job at it at times, but for the most part, I thought Texas ran the ball pretty well. They had great pass protection throughout the day. I know that. I don't know. I'd be frustrated as a Michigan fan.
And Texas fans, you have a lot to be happy about.
The last game that we're really going to cover in depth, and then we're going to kind of go through a speed round, is going to be Tennessee and NC State. The Vols dominated this one. It didn't really feel that way at first. It felt like it was going to be a much closer game. It was 10-3 going into the back half of that second quarter. And then a pretty bad interception from Grayson McCall led the Volunteers to really never look back in this game.
And hopefully earned Will Brooks a scholarship.
Yeah, I can't believe he was a walk-on. He's played last year, I'm pretty sure. I'll say it this way. I think that Tennessee is going to be really dangerous if that defensive line continues to play like they did against NC State. Because oh my gosh, it's got to be so frustrating as a player to go up against that when it's just relentless. And North Carolina State had a little bit of drives going on every now and again, but Tennessee's defense kept making big stops, kept kind of finding themselves in a good position. If Tennessee's defense is like top 20 and this offense remains what it is, this team's a top like 3 team in the country. Because this offense will score points. It's going to score points. It did against NC State. And what I like about Tennessee's offense too is I think it's really designed to wear a team out throughout the game. They play very, very, very fast. They give you all sorts of different looks. They weren't just spreading it out against NC State. If you notice, they kind of brought in a lot of these tighter formations, trying to kind of work kind of crossing routes and different sorts of run game stuff. They thought they had the numbers advantage in the box. Like Tennessee, I think, is a team to look out for this year. And they might be a team to look out for going forward. I know we talked about it a little bit last week with how they looked against Chattanooga. I would pay attention to this team this year and also probably next year. I think next year they might even be better because Nico's going to have another. He has to have another. The defensive line, a lot of those players are not seniors, and that cornerback room will be a year older. Their wide receiver room will be a year older. Just something to kind of think about. I'd watch out for the Volunteers.
Yeah, just looking at Tennessee's team against NC State, they have a very older offensive line, older and experienced, and the rest of the team is pretty young. You have Tennessee's newer receiver room / tight end room. They really spread the ball out. If you look at Tennessee's receiving in this game, no one receiver was targeted more than another. Everybody got targeted.
They had nobody over, 3 targets? Is that right?
Correct. The biggest...
And that's just so hard. Like, I'm gonna talk about this from a defender's perspective real quick. As someone that played football, normally there's one guy it's like, okay, we got to watch him. And I think for Tennessee, there is that to some extent with Squirrel White. Because if he gets the ball in his hands, he can just create and go. But that didn't even really, happen. They were really creative with the way they used Dylan Sampson in the passing game. A lot of little tunnel screens to him. You don't know where the ball's going. And they spread you out so much that you have to declare. So it's going to be very easy reads.
Some impressive receivers and tight ends for Tennessee were Squirrel White, and he's had pretty streaky performances overall. But in this game, he found a way to get open and make spectacular catches. And Ian Maleava really placed the ball perfectly in his hands for 2 receptions for 67 yards. This is a tight end, Miles Kitzelman. You're going to have to learn that name because he was very shifty. And for a tight end, he was impressive. Watching him on one of their touchdown plays, he initially set up a block on an RPO play. He initially set up a block and then went beyond the defensive end because you read the defensive end was dropping back into coverage. And he just went.
I will say this. If Tennessee's tight end scored 2 touchdowns, I think I expect him to win the game. That's all I got to say. And Sampson's a great back, too. I mean, he runs so hard.
Sampson had 20 carries for 132 yards and 2 touchdowns. Just looking at Tennessee's running back room a little bit, they're used to running a 3-back system as of last year. I think they tried to run that in 22. They just didn't have the running backs. But last year they did. They had Jabari Small, Jalen Wright, and Dylan Sampson. Dylan Sampson's the only one that is still here. Jalen Wright went to the NFL, and Jabari Small graduated.
Also went to the NFL, I think. I think he briefly played for the Titans. Anyway.
But this year, it was supposed to be Dylan Sampson, Cam Seldon, and Deshaun Bishop. Well, Cam Seldon had an injury that was off the field, not in a game. And so now it's Dylan Sampson and Deshaun Bishop. Both backs looked really good. They see well from the backfield. They find the gaps, and then they just keep running. When you think they should go to the ground, they do not.
Sampson's their main guy, just like Jalen Wright was. Yeah, I definitely hear you out there.
Looking at NC State, they have a couple of really star guys. You look at Hollywood Smothers and Kevin Concepcion. They faced an elite Tennessee defensive front, and the cornerback room was really focused on targeting Concepcion. But these guys will do well throughout the season and in ACC play. We're looking at Kevin Concepcion, 5 receptions, 53 yards, and Hollywood Smothers had 6 carries for 25 yards, which I know isn't a lot, but on this Tennessee defensive line,
I think NC State's going to be a fine team in ACC play. But my issue is this. Grayson McCall needs to figure it out. Because if he does not figure out, if Grayson McCall cannot figure out how to throw A, under pressure, B, check out of it, and C, deal with the chaos of it all when things aren't going your way and you're really struggling for offense, you're going to lose games. You're going to lose to Clemson. I don't know if you'll lose to Florida State at this rate, but you might lose to Syracuse, as Georgia Tech did this weekend. But for NC State, I think it's a tough loss. I think it is a bit of a heat check, though, on a lot of the hype for NC State this year that was like, okay, take a step back. New quarterback, new system. You got a lot of talent, but we don't know what it's going to be.
they're down, but they're not out. They are very much still in ACC championship contention. I think the ACC championship's wide open. Clemson could be in that, but Clemson is not as good as they have been. Florida State is far out of that. You also have Boston College, Syracuse, NC State's definitely in that conversation as well. So the ACC is wide open, and that's also a potential playoff spot.
I mean, they could be. They could be a playoff team. I don't know if they're better than Clemson. I actually love the way Clemson played against App State this past weekend. They really came out and played some good football, especially offensively. 66-20, I think was the final there. Klubnik played well, and that's like a big thing. Is okay. Klubnik played well.
Klubnik threw for 5 touchdowns, 378 yards in this game, 24 for 26. He missed 2 passes. That's it.
Yeah, and I don't want to delve too much into that. We'll kind of go over that in our quick segments, but yeah, Tennessee definitely a team to watch. I mean, they're gonna be probably favorites in every game that's not the Georgia game. I think for the rest of the year, which is a weird feeling, I'm sure, for a fan base. I think it's used to probably not being very appreciated, I guess, or very well known. But man, Tennessee fans are something else. They're something else.
They will come out for this team.
So now we're gonna quickly kind of just go through a few of the games like we were almost doing with the Clemson App State game.
Let's just go ahead and start with that one.
Yeah, you can go ahead and start with that one.
Clemson App State. The score 66-20. Clemson, first quarter dominated. 35 points first quarter. Klubnik's performance, like we talked about, he had 5 touchdowns. This is a quarterback I've not been high on, really. I think he's just been kind of average. But he has solid performance against App State. I get it's App State. But App State is not traditionally a bad football team, especially in their conference.
I will say this: those corners did not look good. But to be fair, it's Clemson, so we'll see.
We'll let it slide for App State.
Let it slide for App State. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and gear up for my game. I do want to talk about this one because, man, I felt so bad for poor Bowling Green. They weren't able to pull it out in the end. We're leading for a lot of this game. I was very impressed by Basilak, who was their quarterback, threw 2 picks in this game. The Penn State defense finally kind of caught up to its ways, if you will. They did not play very good to start this game. Drew Allar, I think, and this is a little bit of a statement, but Drew Allar needs to be allowed to throw the ball. That Penn State offense really, I think, limits him because he's got a really good arm. I think if you gave him more kind of easy reads, some more boots, they run some boots, but their offense feels very like 2006. You know what I mean? If they had a little bit more innovation there, and I understand you got great running backs, you got Nick Singleton back there. Like, why would you not give it to Nick Singleton? But I'd look at this Penn State team one of 2 ways. One, I think that when the defense inevitably has a bad game, this team will lose, and it will be embarrassing. 2, if the defense doesn't have that game, I think they could win a lot of games. But also, this is not the kind of performance you want to have. That defense looked pitiful in the first half. They couldn't cover anything.
I would agree with that. I didn't find anything wrong with Penn State's offense when they had the ball and driving. Like, they finished drives really well. I thought Drew Aller needs to they need to call more passing plays for him. But Connor Basilak for Bowling Green, I get it's like his millionth year in college, but he did have a pretty good performance.
He better, because I'm pretty sure he's like 36. I think he's got a wife and kids and a mortgage. So, we're going to hop directly into the next game. I think this one's one I really wanted to cover in the Big 3 segment. Let's talk about Arkansas-Oklahoma State. final in overtime. Arkansas led a lot of this game. Really felt like they should win it. And then the defense kind of gave out and the offense started struggling.
If it's 4th and 2 and you know you're running the ball and it's second overtime, maybe set up good run blocking.
That
That
was
was
thought. Good thought.
pretty bad for Arkansas.
I don't think Arkansas would agree with that.
Another quick touch and go game here. Alabama and South Florida. This looked very similar to last year's matchup where it was like 3-0 at half. This game I believe it was 14-6. 14-6.
Yeah. 14-6.
And then USF came right out of halftime and scored. So it was 14-13 for the longest time. And Alabama finally played Alabama's brand of football in the fourth quarter.
And I do want to point this out because if you look at just the final score here, you'd be like, oh, wow, this one, Alabama looks fine. 16-42s, that's fine. Alabama scored 3 touchdowns in the final 6 minutes of this game. So just a reminder, South Florida was really trying to press and really trying to win this game. And Alabama struggled. I just think it's kind of plain and simple. I think that my confidence in Alabama definitely goes down a little bit after this. And I don't know if it's necessarily confidence for Caleb DeBoer, but also that Alabama offense, man, something just doesn't quite feel right. I don't know if they've quite figured it out yet. I think if they do, they're going to be really dangerous. I mean, they scored 42 in this game. I guess you could say they did good. This offense doesn't flow right to me. It just doesn't flow right to me. I want to see them do something different. I'm just not impressed by it. I'm just not impressed by it. And I'm also not impressed by Jalen Milroe.
I'm impressed by Golesh's rebuild of South Florida. I think you look at the stats here, the score does not tell you how well they did. They had 309 total yards. And against Alabama, that's not easy. And if you look at Alabama, too many turnovers.
I think the biggest thing that worries me is that, and they've had this issue for a couple of years, and it was under Saban too, they just sort of feel like they're missing something. Like it's not quite all the way there. And that's kind of the biggest worry is that they're just not figuring it out.
In every game, it looks different. Sometimes quarterback doesn't perform as well. Sometimes there's receivers or defensive backs or running backs that don't perform as well. It's just not the same Alabama that it was when Nick Saban started winning championship.
I could see that. Another game we want to talk about here, Nicholls State LSU. Weird one in Death Valley. Nicholls State actually played LSU pretty tight in this game. LSU ended up winning by a pretty good amount. I think that it's a little bit concerning if you're an LSU fan to kind of see this performance right after a concerning loss to USC. I mean, that's really where I'm at on it. I don't really got much else to say outside of that. I know you wanted to cover it.
Brian Kelly cannot be acting like he is. In the age of the transfer portal, he is going to lose players. He's going to lose his team. His team is going to just completely disconnect. So, takeaway from this game is Brian Kelly has got to keep his act together. And we've seen him fall apart at Notre Dame as well. It's not anything we're not used to. Nicholls State also, I mean, you could look at it and be like, it's Nicholls State. But they consistently have played up to their competition. It's kind of weird, especially the past few years.
Another game I want to cover here, Kansas State, Tulane. Tulane was leading most of this game. Looked like they were going to win this game. Was very impressed, I think, by the way that Tulane's defense played in the early parts of this game. I thought they were really flying around, really getting to the football. Kansas State was a team I picked to be in the playoffs, and I did it for a reason. I really think this team is going to be a severely overlooked team for a good portion of this year. But I think they're young, and I think they're going to figure it out. That being said, I would like to recant my playoff introduction. This might be the worst Kansas State team I've seen in kind of the past 2 years. But I do want to clarify that I think those past 2 Kansas State teams get in pretty easily. I'd be curious to kind of see what Tulane would look like in the Big 12. And this is something I've said for a while. I think Tulane in the Big 12. I just think it's going to happen. I think the next 2 teams in are going to be Tulane and Memphis.
Tulane back to the SEC would be kind of funny too.
Yeah, but they're never going to let Tulane back in the SEC. Are you kidding me? No team ever is going to make a jump from the next teams in the SEC are going to be Clemson and Florida State. That or it's going to be like Miami
and the SEC is not going to be admitting teams for at least 10 years.
They've already come out and said that. So, I mean, it's going to be a while. So,
they have a contract.
They have a contract. Another brief game I want to cover, Syracuse beating Georgia Tech. Kyle McCord actually played his tail off in this game. 4 touchdowns, 381 yards. Was very impressed with him. I really think Georgia Tech kind of benefited from playing a nobody and beating a Florida State team that I think may just be a 7-5 team in the ACC this year, which is like really weird to say, but
This game was not as close as the score looks. Georgia Tech just had like a pretty good comeback in the fourth quarter, but Syracuse dominated this game.
I mean, yeah, I think Syracuse really dominated this game from start to snap to end. Iowa State beat Iowa. I don't think this was necessarily super surprising. I really like the way Iowa State plays offense, and Caden McNamara looked like, how do I put this nicely? I think if you put a perfectly average quarterback in Iowa's offense, they win this game. They win this game by like 2 touchdowns. Caden McNamara is like, I don't know what is going on with him. Like, he just doesn't look. He doesn't look natural. He looks like he's forcing everything. He had a QBR. Oh my gosh. This is unbelievable. He had a QBR of 9.7. 9.7.
Which is egregious.
It's egregious. That's egregious. To give you an idea, right? Because he also had 2 picks, right? Iamaliava had 2 picks in this game, had a QBR of 76.9. So have a QBR in the single freaking digits is insane, and just is an indication that maybe this Iowa team hadn't changed as much as you maybe thought they did after they scored 40 points on, I don't know, Incarnate Word or something.
I thought they were better, but they are not. Well,
well, that would explain it.
When you look at this game, though,
when you said that. That's hilarious.
When you look at this game, though, they were dominating in the first half. They were up 13-0. They looked like they were going to win this game pretty solidly. And then Iowa State just comes back third and fourth quarter and just begins to really roar back. And then this game really came down to, I think it was a field goal towards the end of the game. It wasn't like a game-winning situation, I don't think, but it was a field goal at the end of this game. But that wraps up our week 2 in review.
Hey, hold up. Watch Ashton Jeanty play football, okay? Watch Ashton Jeanty play football. Boise State lost this game because Ashton Jeanty did not touch the ball enough. He had 25 carries, 192 yards, 2 touchdowns against Oregon. I want to point this out again. If you have a television that turns on and functions in any reasonable manner, get your butt in a seat on Saturday and watch Ashton freaking Jeanty play football. If you're not doing it, you are committing crimes against college football, and it is sad. Madsen, the Boise State quarterback, went 17 of 40. 17 of 40 in this game. Completed less than 50% of his passes. If they just give the ball to Ashton Jeanty more, I think they win this game.
And the crazy thing about this game is Oregon had 2 touchdowns off of special teams. Is that right? Boise, get better on special teams. Like, if you just played better on special teams, you win this game.
Boise's still going to be the non-Power 5 bid. That's my prediction. It's either going to be them or Memphis.
Memphis looks pretty good right now.
If Memphis beats Florida State, because
absolutely,
I don't think they'll play anybody. That's got the talent.
But as long as Boise's not on Peacock next week, please watch them.
I don't even care. Buy Peacock at this point. Ashton Jeanty is a national treasure. Oh my gosh. All right, now looking ahead to next week, I mean, I kind of want to make this kind of quick. Next week seems to be like a few big games on the slot. One of the first games I want to highlight here is one that's probably going to go under some people's radar. Memphis, Florida State. Watch Memphis, Florida State this week. Going to be a really, really fun game. I expect Memphis to honestly win this one. I don't know if they're the favorite in this one right now, but they're not. If Memphis wins, watch out because I think they're going to make I don't think, off the top of my head, I can't think of any other team they're going to play this year that's going to be nearly as good as them. They're going to be the favorite in every game, I think, leading up to probably that Tulane matchup. And even then, I think they're a better team than Tulane is. I don't know. This Memphis team is very, very fascinating.
And Florida State has had a bye week, which is honestly a win for them.
It is. They looked rough. They needed to figure it out. Maybe they can kind of get things on the right track against Memphis. Who are you picking in this game?
Despite, DJ Uyagalele having a bye week, I still think he's going to come out and perform pretty poorly. It'll be an interesting matchup. I think Memphis could win it.
You picking Memphis?
I think I'm going with Memphis.
I'm going to pick Memphis as well. It's just vibes. I'm picking them off of vibes. I'm not even going to lie. I just don't like Florida State's vibes this year. Arizona, Kansas State. I think it's going to be a good game, man. Kansas State opens as a 7-point favorite, which I find to be kind of interesting. I'm going to go with Arizona in this one, despite me picking Kansas State. After that game I watched with them against Tulane, and this isn't just to go off of that game, but I think it kind of showcased some issues they have. I do love Avery Johnson, their quarterback, but also if it gets in a shootout, I don't think they have the offensive firepower. And I think Arizona is going to force them into a shoot. They got Tedoroy McMillan. They got Noah Fafita. That offense is crazy. Be very curious to see how Kansas State's defense. Very, very curious. Do they play back in zone? Do they double McMillan? Because McMillan is 6'5" and moves like Mike Evans. All right, like he does, and that's a very high compliment. I will not use a Mike Evans comp. You're gonna very rarely hear me say that. Tedoroy McMillan moves like Mike Evans. Honest to God. So I'd be curious to see what that ends up looking. I'm gonna pick Arizona in this game.
And Arizona at 20 feels very underrated.
Oh, they feel so underrated.
They feel like a top 15 team. They feel like they haven't really dropped off from last year at all. I'm picking Arizona to win this game, despite it being at Kansas State.
They were super young last year too. Just worth noting, they had a lot of turnover. Alabama, Wisconsin.
Here's your big noon game.
Woo! Yay! Let's all play the biggest games of the year at 12 o'clock when I'm probably just rolling out of bed. I don't even go party like that. I want to sleep. I like sleeping.
There is nothing better to rolling out of bed to college football, though.
That is so true. It kind of makes me want to sleep in a little.
But we talk about this game a little bit. Alabama.
Do you pick Wisconsin in this one before you even go into preview? Do you have the guts to do it?
I don't think I have the guts to pick Wisconsin in this game. I'm going to have to pick Alabama. And despite their lack of discipline last week, I don't think Wisconsin is a good enough team to really shock Alabama. I do think this could be a trap game for Alabama, but I don't think Alabama, after last week, is going to struggle the way they did.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because you know who they play their following game. They do have a bye week, but you know who's their next one on the radar? Georgia. And I'm not going to say they're going to be looking ahead, but it may just kind of hit their minds like, okay, we got to play Georgia. I'm also going to say this. I mean, Alabama got stuck with a pretty tough schedule this year. They got to play Georgia. They got to play Tennessee. They got to play Missouri. They got to play LSU. They got to play Oklahoma.
And that's not an easy schedule.
No, that's a miserable schedule.
But despite the trap game, definitely picking Alabama in this game.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm also going to pick Alabama. They're a team I'm definitely curious about going forward this year. I still have issues with their offense. I think that Wisconsin might get off to an early lead in this game, and Alabama will find themselves rolling back into it shortly. But yeah, I'm curious about this game. I'm very curious.
Next game, this is where COD Game Day is going to be on Saturday. Also a noon game. Why are they putting all these good games at noon? LSU at South Carolina. College Game Day is going to be in Columbia.
Don't worry, though. They do have the best game of the week, honest to God, in Kent State, Tennessee at 7:45.
All the good games like Kent State, Tennessee.
Great game, Kent State, Tennessee, man. You ready to watch some high-flying
New Mexico at Auburn.
That one actually might be good.
It could be.
Who knows?
Looking at how bad Auburn is.
No. What happened last year when a New Mexico team decided they were going to come play to Auburn?
But LSU at South Carolina. We'll talk a little bit about this matchup.
There's the Holy War, which I do love the Holy. Utah State, 4:30. Ole Miss Wake Forest on the CW. What? Why is you at UTSA Texas on ESPN as their primetime game? Come on, guys, we got to do better than this, scheduling wise. I mean, I don't know. There is Georgia Kentucky, which I guess is like probably looked better at the start. Anyway, yeah, go ahead. South Carolina, LSU,
South Carolina. Now, South Carolina, we dogged on them a lot last week because they could not handle Old Dominion, but they went to Kentucky, and Kentucky is typically an average team in the SEC. Kentucky looked awful in this game. South Carolina's defense looked unstoppable. And it's not like this game was a blowout early. It took some time to develop, but South Carolina's offense got it figured out.
That number 9's a problem for South Carolina. I don't know how you're...
Is that their edge rusher?
Yeah, he's a freshman. He's
3 guys could not block him, if you've seen that video on the internet.
But I also don't think they're defending him right either. I think that there's too many teams trying to leave a tackle one-on-one. And against an edge rusher like that, like he's obviously proven that he's just too daggum good. It's like a Myles Garrett thing. Like you never leave it. Like you might leave like an elite tackle one-on-one. You got to chip with a tight end. You got to give your guy some.
LSU, we talked a lot about them against Nicholls State and USC. They don't look that great, but they could come out in this one. I think this is also a trap game for them and a way out of the rankings.
At South Carolina is tough. At South Carolina at noon is very different. I'm going to pick LSU to win this game. I think Brian Kelly is able to coax a little bit more of a quality play, and they have the tackles to deal with. They got the best tackles in all of football.
South Carolina looks way too streaky and inconsistent. I definitely would have to go with LSU to win this game, but not in blowout fashion. This is going to be a close game. This could be a shootout, or it could be a really defensive
I
game.
don't see it being a shootout. I think this game probably ends like 28-35, something like that. Like a pretty good offensive game, but not like 56, you know. I think it's a good offensive game for both teams. Last game, we're going to go to the only other ranked matchup this week.
Besides 1, Boston College at Missouri.
Yeah, besides Arizona, Kansas State, there's only one other ranked matchup this week, and that's Boston College, Missouri. I mean, I'm taking. Do I feel like a crazy person for taking Boston College in this game?
I like Castellanos. He looks very good.
They're almost 20-point underdogs. And I'm not saying I think, by the way, this game's on SEC Network. Like, again, ESPN, what are you doing?
At 12:45. Not even prime time. 12:45.
I would even ask for this game to be prime time because I don't think going into this year that you expected this to be anything. I get so frustrated. I think this game could be pretty good. I think Boston College defense is something I want to kind of look at a little bit. They look pretty solid, but that offense has been really efficient. I think Bill O'Brien's actually a really good college coach. He's got an offensive system there that really looks like it works at Boston College. Missouri's at home, and I think it makes the Boston College pick tougher. So I'm gonna go back on the pick I just did. I'm gonna pick Missouri. I'm gonna pick Missouri as bad as it feels. Just because I think Boston College, I think keeps it close though. I like Boston College this year. I think they may be kind of a sneaky team in the ACC because if Clemson has a performance like they did against Georgia, which frankly that could just be Georgia, but I could see this. I mean, I could see a ACC that really doesn't look like it has any good teams outside of maybe Miami and Boston College. I know they play Louisville. That's kind of the other team in the ACC, but they don't play Miami this year. If they do, it'd be in a theoretical ACC championship game. They're going to win out in the ACC this year, let's say, and lose one game to Miami. I think they're in.
Absolutely.
They're probably like an 11 seed, and I don't think that's impossible. I really don't. I like this Boston College team a lot, but yeah.
And the thing to note about Missouri is they are number 2 in defensive efficiency through these 2 weeks. They haven't played anybody, so both games were shutouts. No surprise. But being number 2 in defensive efficiency behind Tennessee is really impressive, especially considering that they were a highly offensive-focused team last year with Brady Cook, Cody Schrader, Theo Weiss, Luther Burden. A lot of those guys returned. Schrader did not, but their running back looks kind of so-so.
Well, I think he looks fine. I don't like his vision. I don't like his vision at all. I think he hits the wrong. I think he's a great athlete in space.
I'm definitely picking. This is a hard pick because Boston College is on up and Missouri is a big question mark.
I think this game's closer than I would bet the spread. That's like where I'm at because the spread's 16.5. I think it's probably going to be like an 8. I think it's going to be pretty close.
I'm going to go against the Missouri pick here.
Oh, really?
Since we've been kind of picking the same teams. I think Boston College can pull this off. I think they can.
That's it. All right. Well, we're almost done for the week, but before we go, we do want to cover one very, very, very important topic.
Playoff contenders.
I get to do who's out this week, and Mr. Know-It-All here gets to do who's in. So, yeah, let's go with you first. Who's in?
Who is in the playoff? After week 2, we've seen a couple teams. They look really prime. I don't think this is a hot take. I think these are all going to be pretty cold takes. Texas looks like a definite number 1 team. I think they'll hold up throughout the year. I think the only game they'll lose is maybe Oklahoma or in the SEC championship.
They don't lose to Georgia? You think they beat Georgia?
I think Texas beats Georgia. I think Texas is a better team than Georgia.
Wow, more bold than I would never say. I don't know. Where I'm at, I think Texas has a good chance to go undefeated. I think that Texas Georgia game's 50. I really do.
But this is my first 4 in.
Okay, buddy. You do you. You do you, pal. See where it gets you.
Second team, we just talked about them, Georgia. Georgia, they might have 30 players getting arrested in 3 years. However, they're still a good football team. I don't think there's much that can be said about that. They always start off rough in the first quarter, and they get better throughout. I don't think that's going to change this year. I think they're still going to be a good football team and easily a championship contender. Number 3, this team is very much on the rise. Tennessee. You look at Tennessee's defense, number 1 in defensive efficiency through these 2 weeks. I get that they played Chattanooga and NC State.
But NC State's still a talent. Like, even though NC State did struggle against Western Carolina, and I worry about that offense long term, they do have a lot of talent. I just don't think they found the way to put it.
Absolutely. But I mean, Tennessee still looks like a very dominant team. Offensively, looks good. A little bit shaky, but for the most part, pretty solid. Defensively, they're going to shut everybody down that they play. Everybody. Mark
Everyone
my
that's
words.
probably not, I don't know, Georgia?
I think Tennessee,
Maybe
Georgia.
Alabama, but Alabama's got to come to Neyland.
Alabama's got to come to Neyland. That's an important game. Tennessee, it'll either be close or it won't be. And there's no in between. Tennessee will either destroy Alabama or it'll be a really close game like 2 years ago. Georgia, this is going to be a close game. They're going to play them close.
I don't see Alabama dominant. Like I was thinking about that. Like I was saying, like, oh, I kind of disagree with that, but no, like Alabama, I don't think is going to be able to, because you're not going to be able to get an efficient run game going, which I think is a big kind of thing for domination. And I think that Tennessee might be able to get a bit of a run game going against them.
And as for Tennessee, Georgia, both of these teams are part of my first four in. This is going to be a low scoring game like it was 2 years ago. It's not going to be as dominant as it was 2 years ago. I think both teams are going to trade back and forth quite a bit, but it's going to be pretty low scoring. We'll talk more about that game when it gets closer to time, especially because there's a lot we need to learn about these two teams. But seeing these two teams in the SEC championship and the playoff and the national championship would be super cool.
Seeing these teams in the playoff would be insane.
And last for first four in, Miami, the U. I get they played a Florida team that's not great, and they played some nobody this week. However, they still look good. They still look really good. Them, USC, I think both of these teams should be in the top 10 and not Penn State and Oregon. But Miami easily looks like a team that's going to be in playoff contention. I mean, if they win the ACC, which it looks wide open for them, they will be in the playoff.
They will be. They absolutely will be.
But that wraps up the first four in.
Time for the first four out. And obviously, I'm not going to talk about teams that stink here. That's one kind of note I have here. I don't want to talk about teams that I think I want to talk about those teams that are fringe teams, but I just don't think are going to be in at this point. I think the team I'm going to go ahead and fire this off of, and this may be a little bit more of a cold take, is Notre Dame. I think with that loss, it's just going to be too difficult. It's just going to be too difficult. They might be really talented, but the problem is they don't play any games. Like, they don't play anybody. They play Louisville, and they play USC at the end of the year. Like, that's it. I'm sorry, but Notre Dame does not have a resume that's going to be worth bringing into a championship. They just don't. They play Army and Navy. Their next best team they play is probably Florida State or Georgia Tech. One of those two. And I'm sorry, that resume doesn't get you in. Wins over probably what will ultimately be about a mid-tier team in Louisville and probably a mid-tier team in USC. That's just not going to cut it. I'm sorry. A team like Memphis should get in over you if they go undefeated in American play, because they showed more consistency than you did, frankly. So I don't know. I think Notre Dame is one of those teams that they're just not going to be able to overcome this. I mean, this was a terrible loss. I'm curious to see how that locker room responds. I mean, that is heart-wrenching. Anyways, next team I'm going to have out. This one may be a little bit weird because the Big 12 is all over the place. Kansas, we didn't hit on their loss to Illinois this week, but they did not look good. This was a team that was supposed to be powered by a high-flying offense with Jalen Daniels really flying around, making plays. He had 3 picks in this game. He did not play good. And that's been kind of my issue with Jalen Daniels. Like, I just don't think he's an efficient passer. And I think he gets away with it because he's super athletic. He can make a lot of crazy plays, but I don't think he does well in structure. I just don't. Next team I have out, gonna be a little bit of a spicy one. This one, I know that this one's gonna be a little bit all over the place. Michigan, I think's out, and the reason is basically because I don't think they're going to beat Ohio State. I think there's a good chance they lose another Big Ten game this year, and I think there's a good chance that a different team represents in the Big Ten championship. Maybe an Oregon, heck, maybe a team like Wisconsin. Maybe a team like Nebraska with how they dismantled Colorado this week. Lastly, I'm going to hit on the number 4 team I think is going to be out. I will say doing the Who's Out podcast is a lot more difficult than doing the Who's In podcast.
It's easy to talk about the good teams. It's not hard, or it's not easy to talk about the teams that might be falling off.
Yeah.
Especially in week 2.
Yeah, week 2 is tough. Week 1, I imagine it's even harder. But at least you had Florida State to kind of lean on, and you didn't even pick them.
I didn't even pick them. A lot of that was because I looked at 0-2 and said, nah.
That is fair. Well, actually, 0-1 at the time. But you know what? I think I'm going to go with a team that I probably should be a little bit higher on based on their talent, but LSU does not feel like they're going to make it to me. I don't know if they were a team you talked about last week, but they're just a team I just don't feel good about. I feel like Brian Kelly's like might low key be on the hot seat this year. If he's not, then I think he maybe should be. It's very concerning what's going on there. That's really all I got. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, you have been listening to the Totally Biased Football Podcast. Thank you for tuning in. If you made it this far, I think you'd be doing yourself a disservice. And hit the like button and subscribe. Get this to other college football fans that want a little bit of a podcast they can listen to, hang out to, do homework to, whatever you so choose to do during your time when you're listening to us. We don't mind. Come back. We're always here for the good vibes and talk a little bit of football and deal with the insanity that is college football at times. Even though this past week, a little bit there were some upsets for sure, but it didn't feel like it was all too crazy besides Northern Illinois. But yeah, guys, we're going to see you all next time. Thank you so much for listening.